magic pulsed, technology thrived. The two intertwined, an intricate dance of power and innovation. This was the world of Eldira and Valorian, two kingdoms once bound by an age of prosperity. Now they were separated by a chasm of hatred, a legacy of betrayal etched in blood and fire. Decades of war had ravaged the land, leaving behind the skeletal remains of cities, grim testaments to the insatiable hunger of conflict. Across the battlefields, the air crackled with arcane energy. Soldiers clashed, their blades imbued with enchantments, their armor reinforced by forgotten sciences. Each side fought with the fury of desperation, driven by the whispers of ancient prophecies and the promise of ultimate power. For at the heart of the conflict lay a prize coveted by both, the Star of Etherian, the Star, a mystical gem whispered to hold the very essence of creation and destruction. Legend claimed it granted dominion over life and death, the power to reshape the world in the image of its possessor. Its allure was a siren song, drawing both kingdoms deeper into the abyss of war, blinding them to the ruin they left in their wake. The origins of the Star of Etherian were shrouded in mystery, lost to the mists of time. Some believed it to be a gift from the gods, a testament to their power and a symbol of their watchful gaze. Others saw it as a curse, a Pandora's box waiting to unleash chaos upon the world. Whatever its true nature, the star had vanished from the world centuries ago, leaving behind only fragmented tales and the echoes of its former glory. But legends have a way of resurfacing, especially in times of desperation. As the war raged, rumors began to spread like wildfire through the ravaged lands. Whispers of the star's return, of its fragments scattered across the world, waiting to be found. The promise of such power was too tempting to resist, igniting a desperate race between Eldira and Valorian, pushing the conflict towards a terrifying precipice. Smoke choked the sky, a thick, acrid blanket obscuring the weak sun. The ground trembled underfoot, a rhythmic pulse of destruction echoing from the front line. Arius Zalian, his face streaked with grime and sweat, crouched behind a crumbling stone barricade. The air hummed with anticipation, a deadly symphony of clanging steel and distant screams. This was the rhythm of war, a melody he knew by heart. He gripped his sword, its hilt slick with sweat. Fear, a familiar serpent coiled in his gut, but he forced it down. Fear was a weakness on the battlefield, a vulnerability waiting to be exploited. He was a soldier of the Valorian Empire, bred for war, trained to be a weapon. He would not falter, not now.
They're pushing hard this time, Kael muttered, his voice barely audible above the din. Think they know about the relic?
Arius shook his head, though he couldn't help but share his friend's concern. Their mission was of vital importance, to retrieve a lost relic, a weapon from a bygone era rumored to hold immense power. It was a desperate gamble, a last-ditch effort to turn the tide of the war in the Empire's favor. The order to charge came as a roar, a surge of adrenaline that sent Arius and his comrades scrambling over the barricade. The world dissolved into a chaotic blur of steel and fury. He parried a blow, the clang of metal resonating through his bones. Then he lunged forward, his sword finding its mark with a sickening thud. The battle raged around him, a whirlwind of death and destruction. He fought with the ferocity drilled into him since childhood, his movements honed to a deadly precision. But, amidst the carnage, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A lone figure clad in the blue and silver of Eldira lay sprawled on the ground, separated from the fray. He approached cautiously, his sword still raised. As he drew closer, he saw it was a woman, her armor torn, her breathing shallow. Blood seeped from a gash on her arm, staining the ground crimson. Her eyes, a startling shade of emerald green, met his with a mixture of defiance and fear. Arius hesitated. He was trained to kill, to show no mercy to the enemy. But something in those emerald eyes, a flicker of shared humanity amidst the carnage, stayed his hand. He couldn't strike her down.
Arius, what are you doing?
Kael's voice, sharp with concern, cut through the fog of battle. He rushed to Arius' side, his gaze darting between his friend and the wounded Eldiran soldier.
She's the enemy. Finish her.
Arius shook his head, his gaze fixed on the woman. Arius Zalian. She's unarmed, he mumbled, more to himself than to Kale. He couldn't explain the sudden surge of empathy, the feeling of kinship with this enemy soldier. Was it weakness, or was it something more, a flicker of doubt in the righteousness of his cause? Kale followed his gaze, his expression softening slightly. He too had seen the horrors of war, the senseless violence that had consumed their world. He understood the toll it took, the way it chipped away at your humanity, leaving behind a hollow shell. Arius Zalian. We can't just leave her here, Arius said finally, his voice firm despite the turmoil within him. He knew he was treading dangerous ground, defying the very principles he'd been raised on, but he couldn't ignore the quiet voice in his head, the one whispering that there was more to this war than the propaganda they'd been fed since childhood. Kale sighed, his shoulders slumping with resignation. He knew better than to argue with Arius when he got that look in his eye, the look of unwavering conviction.
Fine, he muttered. But if she tries anything... He let the threat hang in the air, his hand instinctively moving to the dagger sheathed at his belt.
The weight of the wounded Eldiran soldier, surprisingly light in his arms, pulled Arius away from the battlefield's clamor. Kyle followed close behind, his gaze darting between their surroundings and the woman. Her name, they learned, was Lyra Ardent. Even weakened, her emerald eyes held a flicker of defiance that both intrigued and unsettled Arius. They found shelter in the ruins of a bombed-out church, its stained glass windows shattered, replaced by the cold light of the dying sun. Lyra, her breathing still ragged, clutched a piece of cloth against her wound. It was then that Arius noticed a glint of something beneath the fabric, a shard of crystal, pulsing with an ethereal light.
What's that? Kyle asked, his voice sharp with suspicion.
Lyra hesitated, her fingers tightening protectively around the crystal. Lyra Ardent, it is... Nothing, she said, her voice strained. A trinket, of no importance. Arius exchanged a look with Kale. Neither of them believed her. The intensity of the light emanating from the crystal, the way Lyra regarded it with such ferocity, spoke of something more than a mere trinket. This was something important, something potentially dangerous. As the day stretched into nights punctuated by the distant rumble of artillery fire, a fragile truce settled over the ruined church. They were enemies, bound by circumstance and a shared desire to escape the clutches of the war that had consumed their world. Yet the weight of their pasts hung heavy in the air, unspoken but ever present. One evening, as the shadows lengthened and a chill settled over the ruins, Arius found himself haunted by memories. Memories of his older brother, Darian, a hero of the Empire, his name etched in the annals of Valorian history. Darian, with his easy smile and unwavering belief in the Empire's cause. Darian, who had fallen in battle, a casualty of a war Arius was no longer sure he understood. Arius, Zalion, my brother, he believed in this war, Arius said, his voice barely a whisper breaking the silence that had settled over them. Lyra, her gaze fixed on the flickering flames of their makeshift fire, didn't speak. But he could feel her listening, her silence heavy with unspoken understanding. Arius Zalian. He died a hero, Arius continued, his voice tight with unshed tears. But what if it was all for nothing? What if the Empire... What if we are fighting for the wrong side? The words hung in the air, heavy with doubt and a growing sense of disillusionment. Kyle shifted uncomfortably, the firelight casting dancing shadows across his face. He rarely spoke of his past, the pain still too raw, the wounds too deep. But that night, as if compelled by some unseen force, he began to speak. His voice, usually gruff and laced with sardonic humor, was low, filled with a quiet grief that sent chills down Arius' spine.
They called them traitors, said they were harboring Eldiran sympathizers. They burned our farm, killed everyone I ever loved.
He paused, his gaze hardening.
They left me alive. A reminder of their power, I suppose. A tool to be used against their enemies.
Lyra, her emerald eyes wide with empathy, reached out and gently touched Kale's arm. He flinched at her touch but didn't pull away.
My mother, she tried to stop this war. She believed in peace, in finding common ground.
She spoke of her mother, the Queen of Eldira, a woman of grace and wisdom who had dared to dream of a world without war, a dream that had been brutally shattered by betrayal, by the greed and ambition of those who clung to power.
She went to negotiate a peace treaty, but the Empire, they never intended to honor their word. They killed her, murdered her in cold blood.
The air crackled with unspoken tension, the weight of their shared grief, the realization that their pasts were intertwined in ways they could never have imagined, hung heavy in the air. It was then that the crystal, nestled protectively in Lyra's hand, began to pulse with an eerie light. The light intensified, casting grotesque shadows that danced and writhed upon the ruined walls of the church. The air grew heavy, charged with an energy that sent shivers down their spines. And then, the world fractured. For a fleeting moment, Arius saw it, a vision of the future, a terrifying glimpse into a world consumed by darkness. He saw cities reduced to rubble, their skies choked with smoke and ash. He saw armies clashing, not with swords and magic, but with weapons of unimaginable destruction. And at the heart of it all, he saw the star, its light twisted and corrupted, fueling the endless cycle of war. The vision vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind a lingering sense of dread. The crystal, its light dimmed, fell silent, but the image remained etched in Arius's mind, a stark warning of the future that awaited if the star's power fell into the wrong hands. Silence descended upon the ruined church, heavy with the weight of revelation. The fragmented vision of the future, a terrifying tapestry of destruction and despair, hung in the air like a shroud. Arius stared at the star fragment nestled in Lyra's palm, its ethereal glow now dimmed, as if drained by the glimpse into the abyss. He felt a cold dread seep into his bones, chilling him to the core.
The star. It can't fall into the wrong hands. We can't let it fuel this war any longer.
Kael, his face etched with a grim understanding, nodded slowly. He had seen the darkness in the depths of the Empire, that insatiable hunger for power that drove its every action. The vision of the future had only solidified his resolve to break free from its grip.
My mother believed the star could bring peace, that its power could heal the rifts between our people.
But at what cost?
He had seen the seductive allure of power, how it could twist even the noblest of intentions. The star was a double-edged sword, capable of forging peace or plunging the world into an abyss of unimaginable suffering. Driven by a shared sense of urgency, the trio decided to press deeper into Eldiran territory. Their destination, the rumored resting place of the Star of Etherian. It was a perilous gamble, venturing into the heart of enemy territory, but they knew time was running out. Both the Empire and Eldira were closing in, their pursuit of the star's power becoming more desperate with each passing day. News reached them of Emperor Lucian Valoris, Arius' own emperor, a man once revered for his wisdom and strength. Now, whispers spoke of a ruler consumed by paranoia, obsessed with crushing Eldira and seizing the star for himself. The emperor believed it was his birthright, the key to ushering in a new era of Valorian dominance.
He's lost his way, Arius muttered, his heart heavy with a growing sense of disillusionment. He had believed in the Empire, in its ideals of order and justice. But the pursuit of power had poisoned its core, twisting its principles into tools of oppression. Power does that, Kael said, his voice laced with bitterness. He had seen firsthand the corrupting influence of the Empire, how it could crush those deemed a threat, even its own citizens. He had sworn to break free from its grasp, but the shadows of his past still lingered.
Their journey became a race against time, a desperate bid to stay one step ahead of the Empire's relentless advance. They traveled through war-torn landscapes, their path marked by the scars of conflict, the remnants of villages razed to the ground, the echoes of Les Entendidos. Patsei Sikher. Promise only just so I can. As they ventured deeper into Eldiran territory, they encountered a different kind of darkness. The Eldiran people, once known for their reverence for nature and their pursuit of balance, were now consumed by a fervent nationalism, fueled by their leaders' promises of restoring their kingdom to its former glory. But beneath the veneer of righteousness, Arius sensed a disturbing truth. They encountered refugees fleeing the advance of both armies, their tales painting a grim picture of the elder days, the LDD Elias Ardent. He was portrayed as a benevolent ruler, a shepherd guiding his people through darkness, but the refugees spoke of forced conscriptions, of dissent silenced with brutal efficiency, of a desperation that mirrored the Empire's lust for power.
They're both the same, Lyra whispered one night, her voice filled with a chilling realization. She had grown up in the heart of the Eldiran court, surrounded by its gilded cages and carefully constructed illusions. Now the scales had fallen from her eyes, revealing the rot that lay at the heart of her kingdom.
Arius nodded grimly, understanding settling over him like a shroud. The war had become a self-perpetuating monster, consuming everything in its path. Both sides, blinded by their own righteousness, had become the very things they claimed to fight against. Their journey led them to the ruins of an ancient temple, half swallowed by the encroaching forest. Legend spoke of this place as the cradle of Eldiran civilization, the birthplace of their magic, and the resting place of their most sacred relics. It was here, amidst the crumbling stones and whispering shadows, that they hoped to find the Star of Etherian. But they were not alone. Both the Emperor's forces and the King's elite guard had converged upon the temple, their banners a stark reminder of the conflict that raged across the land. The air crackled with tension, the silence before the storm, broken only by the distant calls of birds and the rustling of leaves.
"We have to stop them," Arya said, his voice filled with a newfound resolve. The vision of the future, seared into his mind, fueled his determination. He had to believe there was another way, a path that didn't end in the ashes of their world. But how? Kyle asked, his gaze sweeping across the assembled armies. They were but 3 against thousands, their chances of success impossibly slim.
Arius looked at Lyra, her emerald eyes reflecting the flickering torchlight, her fingers wrapped tightly around the star fragment. A desperate gamble began to form in his mind, a plan fraught with risk but fueled by the slimmest glimmer of hope. The star's power was a double-edged sword. Perhaps it could be used to end the conflict, not by granting victory to one side, but by shattering the very foundation of the war itself. The ground shuddered. The air crackled with raw, untamed energy. Arius stood at the heart of the maelstrom, the star of Aetherium pulsing brightly in his outstretched hand. Around him the world seemed to unravel, the very fabric of reality groaning under the strain of the gem's power. He could feel its seductive pull, the seductive whisper of control, of dominion over life and death. But he also saw the future, the horrifying tableau of endless war fueled by the star's corrupted power. He saw the faces of Lyra and Kale, their features twisted in pain and despair, and he knew with a certainty that transcended logic that there was only one path left to him.
Arius, no!
Lyra's voice, thin and reedy, pierced through the cacophony. He saw her anguish, her desperate plea for him to reconsider, to choose a different path, but it was too late. His resolve had solidified, hardened in the fires of a terrible choice. He closed his eyes, shutting out the world's impending collapse, the horrified cries of the soldiers, the clash of steel against steel. He focused on the warmth of the star, the raw power thrumming against his palm, and with a heavy heart he crushed it. Silence, an eerie, ringing silence descended upon the world. The air, once thick with magic and the stench of death, felt strangely still. Arius opened his eyes, his vision blurry, his body aching as if racked by a fever. The battlefield, once a scene of chaotic violence, lay eerily still. Broken bodies, both Eldiran and Valorian, lay scattered across the ravaged earth, forever frozen in their final moments. The star was gone. Its power, its promise, its threat all vanished. In its place, a profound emptiness settled in Arius' chest, a void where purpose and resolve had once resided. He had gambled with fate, shattered the very foundation of their world, and in the aftermath, a chilling question arose. What had he done? A soft groan broke the silence. Arius turned, his heart leaping into his throat. and saw Kale stirring amidst the debris. Relief, sharp and sudden, washed over him, followed by a surge of concern.
Kyle, are you all right?
Kyle coughed, his eyes fluttering open slowly. He looked around, his gaze taking in the devastation, the ghostly silence that hung in the air.
What happened?
His voice was a raspy whisper laced with confusion and pain. Ashes of the Fallen Star is a tale woven from the threads of war, sacrifice, and the enduring power of choice. It paints a stark portrait of a world consumed by conflict, where the lines between right and wrong blur amidst the clash of ideologies and the insatiable hunger for power. The Star of Aetherion, a beacon of both hope and destruction, serves as a potent symbol of the duality of power and the far-reaching consequences of its pursuit. The story grapples with the futility of war, highlighting the cyclical nature of violence and the ease with which noble intentions can be twisted to serve darker purposes. Arius, Kale, and Lyra, each scarred by the conflict, embody the human cost of war, their individual journeys reflecting the struggle to retain one's humanity amidst the dehumanizing chaos of the battlefield. Their unlikely alliance, forged in the crucible of shared loss and disillusionment, underscores the possibility of finding common ground even amidst the deepest divisions. The story challenges us to confront the complexities of war, to question the narratives we are fed, and to recognize the humanity in those we perceive as enemies. Ultimately, Ashes of Ashishi from Ancestor Star Wild Star is a story about redemption, forgiveness, and the enduring power of choice. It reminds us that even in the darkest of times, even when the world seems poised on the brink of annihilation, we have the capacity to choose a different path. It is a story that lingers long after the final page is turned, its echoes resonating in the quiet spaces of our own lives, urging us to seek understanding, to break free from the shackles of hatred and to strive for a better tomorrow. The world was quiet. The echoes of war had faded into a fragile silence, leaving behind a landscape scarred and broken, yet strangely serene. The sun, a pale disk through the lingering dust, cast long shadows across the ruins, a reminder of the passage of time, the relentless march towards an uncertain future. Arius stood on a hill overlooking the valley where the final battle had raged. The ground beneath his feet was scattered with debris, the remnants of a conflict that had consumed their world. He could still sense the faint traces of magic in the air, like the lingering scent of a dying fire. But the world felt different, cleansed somehow. He took a deep breath, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth, and the faint sweetness of wildflowers pushing through the ashes. A new dawn was breaking, but the scars of yesterday remained etched upon the land, upon their hearts. The war was over, but the fight for peace, for healing, for a future free from the shadows of the past had just begun. He turned and looked at Kale and Lyra, their faces etched with weariness and a flicker of hesitant hope. They had walked a long and arduous path together, bound by the shared burden of their choices, their losses. Now they stood at a crossroads, the future stretching before them, uncertain yet full of possibilities. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but they would face it together, step by step, rebuilding their shattered world from the ashes of the fallen star.